Our scripture reading comes today from the very beginning of the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, of those who carried forward the impulse brought by Jesus Christ. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly, from heaven, there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues, as if of fire, appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages, as the Spirit gave them the ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? How is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. Each in our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" But others sneered and said, "They're filled with new wine." But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. "Men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these men are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through our prophet Joel. In the latter days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." And such was the outpouring of the Spirit upon them. Now this day of Pentecost is another aspect of the Christian calendar throughout the year. Pentecost was based upon an older Jewish tradition of Shavuot, but Pentecost comes to us penta, meaning 50. And so Pentecost follows Easter by 50 days. It also follows the ascension of the risen Jesus Christ by 10 days. So the ascension came 40 days after Easter. The Pentecost, or the pouring out of Spirit power, comes 50 days after Easter. But I'm hoping today that we might take the essential divine idea of Pentecost into our hearts and minds and make it meaningful and make it a change for our lives. For that is its purpose. I first want to begin with a story that takes place between the time of the crucifixion, yet before the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's actually one of my favorite stories. It's generally referred to as the road to Emmaus, or the walk to Emmaus. Now, if you can just imagine, two of the followers of Jesus, most disappointed, heartbroken, even traumatized over the crucifixion of their master, their teacher. They were on their way to a nearby town known as Emmaus. This is how it is told in Luke's Gospel. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened in Jerusalem. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and walked along with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And so he was a stranger to them. And he said, "What are you discussing with each other while you're walking along here?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these recent days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things, the events around Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over. He was condemned to death and crucified. But we had hoped that he was one to redeem Israel, to bring us salvation. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe that the prophets had declared this to you. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself throughout all their scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread. He blessed and broke it and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And then he vanished from their sight. So here we have a most powerful story of recognition. A recognition that we can all experience. A recognition that's not confined to the gospel stories, but is an active part in the path of any truth seeker, any student of spirituality, any heart and mind that hungers for a greater understanding of oneself, the world, the Creator. This recognition comes when truly our eyes are opened, our heart expanded, our mind receptive. Now, for these individuals, we get a little key from this story, this walk to Emmaus. They were so focused in on their own experience, and rightly so. They were grieving and, as I said, even traumatized at what had become of their teacher. And secondly, they were living in confusion or the mystery of the women who were first to go to the tomb and said the body of their master was no longer there. So they were wondering, what's going on? What does this all mean? So on their path, here comes a stranger, so they think. And that stranger begins revealing to them their scriptures, the truth of their people, their collective wisdom and understanding of their God and their relationship to God. Well, that began to draw their attention. But it was not until they sat down at a meal and this individual broke the bread and offered thanks to God. And in that moment, they recognized, they made the connection that this stranger who had inspired them was indeed the same as that Spirit, that Christ that had taught them before the crucifixion. They put the picture together. And so this first step, which we can apply to our life, we can apply to our role as a spiritual seeker, is this power of recognition. This power that many traditions call awakening. Awakening to truth. Awakening to a greater reality, a greater picture. But there has to be a preparation. It doesn't happen on us, our open eyes, unless we are seeking. We are wanting to know. We are open and receptive. So this recognition, we may say in a more general way than this gospel story, is to recognize the presence and power in unity. In Christianity, we call it Christ, the individualization of God, the impulse of God with us, among us, within us. This recognition of this Christ impulse requires our wakefulness, that we are on guard. It requires our openness, that we are willing to take in the new. Rudolf Steiner, who I often quote, made a statement to his students that I found quite remarkable. He said, someone who is on a spiritual path, a student, must learn to never say these words again. To never say these words again. And the statement is, I've never heard that before. I don't believe it. I've never heard that before. I don't believe it. In other words, to be open and receptive, we have to be willing to at least consider the new, the unusual, something we haven't met on our path before. There is also the quality of positivity. In our unity tradition, we look for good as our way of looking for God, seeking this Christ impulse by looking for the true, the good, for God. We practice it, as I mentioned recently, through our techniques of affirmative prayer, affirming that truth in life, in our life, and denying appearances to the contrary. So it's generally taking a positive approach. But we don't make our positive approach like that of Pollyanna or the proverbial ostrich that puts its head into the sand, ignoring anything it does not like or does not want to consider. Because the world, I'm afraid, at the moment, since it and the human family is a work in progress, there are obstacles we haven't overcome. There are ways in our relationship with others that are not yet purely loving and cooperative. And so we can't ignore those, but we look beyond them through our affirmations and our prayer, through our positivity. There's an old story. Some say it comes from Persian tradition, so long before the time of Jesus. Rudolf Steiner told it as a story of Master Jesus. But it's a story of wisdom, however we look at it, and of positivity. And the Master, or Jesus, was walking with his followers one day when they came upon the carcass, the rotting carcass of a dog. What's like we even see, I've noticed a lot this week along Highway 5. We know what that's like. Not always pleasant, especially if you're actually walking on the road near it. So the Master came upon this carcass, and his response was, "What beautiful teeth! What beautiful teeth!" He did not ignore the carcass, the rotting flesh. He could see that, but he could look beyond it in the way of positivity toward the extraordinary, strong, white, beautiful teeth that were left in this dead animal. So that is a sense of the positivity of which I speak. It can look beyond or through or over. As the famous minister in California at the Crystal Cathedral, Dr. Robert Schuller, often said, when we meet a challenge, like a mountain, we climb over it, we go around it, we tunnel underneath it. In other words, we go beyond it, toward the greater good, the positive that can always be found. So this openness, this soul quality of positivity, is what prepares us for this glorious recognition. It's something you can practice each and every day, wherever you are. Another great teacher of 500 years ago, Brother Giovanni, as he was known in Italy, wrote a famous greeting. I always share it at Christmas or on New Year's Eve for a service. And it has a wonderful statement that he essentially says, there is no grand vision, there's no wonderful paradise that the seed of which is not in this very moment. There is no ultimate joy that doesn't begin here, now. That's an empowering statement to recognize as co-creators with God, for we are God's image and likeness. Therefore, we're creative. We have an effect in our life and in our world. That the seed of our greatest dream is already here. Dr. Ernest Wilson, another early great unity minister, used an expression. I've never tracked down if it was truly his unique words or he was quoting another, but he often referred to the fact that God does not place in your heart a good desire, a good dream, without also placing the power in you to fulfill that dream. So to recognize that truth is to recognize the Christ impulse in your life, here, now. Yes, we make a big deal of this Sunday of Pentecost in the church calendar, in the church teaching, because it is understood that as the power came upon the apostles in Jerusalem, and Jesus Christ, their master and way shower, had returned to invisibility. He was no longer physically present, but was spiritually present. Out of sight, yet not out of their minds and hearts. But they were now going to take up this Christ impulse and change the world in their day and even unto our day, by recognizing their master, their Christ, their teacher, was always and everywhere present as a guide. If they were willing to be open in heart and mind, positive in their outlook, ready to greet the new and say, what does this mean? How does this affect my life, our community, our world? What can be made of this for the good of all? So we may recognize this Christ impulse, this impulse for life that moves us forward along our path to our greater good, to our perfecting, our unfolding of all our divine potential, all that we're meant to be, each in his or her own unique way. But Pentecost has one other lesson. It is one thing to recognize the activity of God or Spirit in your life, but to be a true mover and shaker, a true seeker of truth, one who is going to make a good difference in one's life and one's world. There's another ingredient besides recognition of Spirit, and that is that you make the conscious choice to work with that power, to carry that power forward. Rudolf Steiner, in speaking of the key mysteries of the Christian year, from the holy birth of Christmas to the great sacrifice and overcoming of Easter, and now we come to Pentecost. He said what the Christ accomplished in the resurrection was a cosmic gift, a divine gift for all people. It was not something owned by what became the Christian church. It was an empowering gift to the world. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore called it, or likened it to, a blood transfusion for a dying race. That humanity was weakening and failing, and this Christ deed was a deed of resurrection for all people. A divine gift provided in freedom for this world, for each one of us. But Pentecost represents something quite different. Pentecost is for you to make the free choice to align yourself with this deed of Christ, to carry forward this impulse toward good, this constructive, uplifting urge, for you to make the conscious choice to walk that path. That is the choice of Pentecost. We recognize it. We recognize the power of Spirit, and then we choose to be a channel of it, to cooperate to allow it to work through us. I just happened across a newsletter that came to me from the school I attended in Switzerland 3 years ago. And one of the directors of that work made a powerful statement. And I really enjoyed a man from the Netherlands. I always enjoyed his name, Bodo van Plato. Bodo van Plato. He was a wonderful teacher. I enjoyed being able to work with him, but he recently said at an international meeting there at the Swiss headquarters of the School of Spiritual Science, he said there is a considerable qualitative difference between revelations, new ideas, received in isolation and communicated to others, told to others. There's a great difference between that and revelations or new ideas that arise out of the result of joint effort, of community focus, of working together. Do you see? Do you hear the difference? He's making a distinction between our own inner revelations, our own insights, that then we tell one another about, and the new ideas or insights or revelations that come to us when we're willing to work together. It's really another way of expressing our offertory affirmation that we're using this month, that I've told you was an affirmation Charles Fillmore used 100 years ago in the building up of the unity movement, in saying, in our unity of purpose, in the work that we agree to do together, we are guided by infinite wisdom or insight, and we're prospered by divine love, or the spiritual abundance necessary to bring our work together into fruition. So there's a distinction. Yes, we can be an individual spiritual seeker and going in our way in isolation through the high mountains of experience, or sitting in a desert in meditation. And this is good. It may be a part of our path. But we must remember the work that we only accomplish together as God's community. That's the essence of what it means for a church, a ministry, to prosper. It's what we can only accomplish together. So this is another aspect that will conclude our look at this Sunday of Pentecost. We give thanks for our ability, through positivity, open heart, open mind, a seeking of God's activity in our life, and recognizing it, even in the smallest moment, the tiniest, we might even say insignificant detail of our life, we can have an awakening, a revelation. Then we make a choice, a conscious choice. Yes, this is what I want to work toward. This is what I want to give myself to. We can give ourselves to many things in life. This is the important choice. What do I want to align myself with? What is the foundation of my life? And then this third step. What is my task within this community? What part am I willing to play in our greater good, in our working together? So I invite you now to turn within as we take a moment to take our experience of this lesson, whatever we are taking in on this day of Pentecost, to take it within in prayer and let it touch us deeply, significantly, in the very center and meaning of our life. And as we enter a time of silent reflection, let me prepare the way with this verse for Pentecost, allowing these poetic words to make the path within clear before us. Thou holy fire, make thy home in us, when we at peace can see and serve the truth. Make strong in us the memory of Christ. Bring to our tongues his world-renewing word. Thou gracious light, uniting distant human beings in certainty on paths of active thought. Make clear to us the charge of destiny. Bring to our heads thy world-renewing hope. Thou healing breath, who in the body's depths restores harmony with heaven's will. Let live in us the order of the stars. Bring to our hearts their world-renewing joy. So let us rest now together in silence, allowing the ever-present Spirit of life and truth, even the guiding Christ, to be recognized and to commit ourselves to walking this path of good, this life way, awaiting our next step. And now we each in our own way make our thanksgiving. For we recognize in this time of silence that the very seed of our greatest hope and dream and desire is present within us now. We may choose in freedom to cultivate that seed for an ever greater harvest in our life, in our human family, in our world. I invite you to gradually allow your attention to return to this sanctuary. And as you're ready to open your eyes,